our webinar today is what are the current trends for the African EIDM ecosystem and the AEN in the next 10 years. My name is Siziwe Ngcwabe. I am the lead for the Africa Evidence Network. Welcome to this webinar. Just to make things easier for all of us that are joining in the platform, we will invite you to participate as much as possible during this session. And this session also will be recorded. And we would like to make sure that people have their cameras off during the session, just to accommodate people's bandwidth and their slow connections, because people will be joining from across the world. So we'll make sure that people are able to join. And then we'll also request our participants to switch off their mics unless they are prompted to use their mics, just to make sure that we reduce the disruptive noise during the webinar so that all of us can be able to interact with the content. In case of any technical problems, please write to the chat so that Kyle and the CompSA team will attend to them and help you ensure that you are part of this webinar. And then please engage with us on our chat box during the webinar. Ms. Charity Chisoro will manage all your inputs and questions. Just also to say that we are so excited to have Evidence 2022, where we, as the AEN, are ensuring that people are coming together to enhance mutual learning and innovation in EIDM in the continent. So we hope that you're going to enjoy joining Evidence 2022 during the 19th and the 21st of September 2022, and we are looking forward to hosting you and you're contributing as well. Just to say that the AEN is celebrating their biggest milestone, which is 10 years since our establishment. And also, we are happy to provide an opportunity for collaboration to enhance mutual learning and new ideas. And please enjoy this virtual experience that will be facilitated in real time, and offline collaborations also will be encouraged. Just to say that I'm really excited to hand over to our moderator, Dr. Carina van Rooyen, who's going to facilitate these discussions during this webinar. Over to you, Dr. Carina.
Thank you very much, Siziwe, and really nice for me to be here. And a special welcome to our panelists this afternoon, and also to all our AEN members and anyone else joining us. Now, by now, you would have attended some of the other webinars in our series. And the purpose of our series of webinars is really that we want to reflect on and discuss kind of the current trends in the EIDM ecosystem, what the implications of these are for us across Africa and also for the AEN. And we also want to use these discussions as a basis to improve the evidence ecosystem and evidence use across Africa. Now, this afternoon's webinar's primary purpose is to really look at what insights we can gain from our panelists and then from one another about what are the current trends in the EIDM ecosystem across Africa, and kind of use that insight to position ourselves as the AEN in terms of where we're going and what our own position in the EIDM ecosystem across Africa is. And maybe if I can start with just a reminder of what I mean when I say EIDM ecosystem or evidence ecosystem. I draw on that, Ruth, on you and colleagues' article of 2019, where you defined a evidence ecosystem as a system reflecting the formal and informal linkages and interactions between different actors and their capacities and resources that's involved in the production, translation, and use of evidence. So it really is these mixture of formal, informal across the sectors, the various kinds of actors, and how that all gel together in a unique system that makes sure and helps us and supports us in having good quality use of good quality evidence across Africa. If I can introduce our panelists this afternoon. Kirchuffs, lovely to have you here. Kirchuffs, I'm sure, are very familiar to members of the AEN. He's the Executive Director of PAX Africa, that is a youth-led Pan-African think tank that is focused on improving uptake of research and other forms of evidence in policy, processes, and practices. He's been working on capacity development at individual and institutional level. He has over 10 years experience in evidence to policy field, playing various roles from local to national to regional level and has been collaborating with numerous people across Africa. His strategic position and work really has earned him various appointments. Where I am based at the University of Johannesburg. Kirchuffs is a research associate, but he's also a visiting faculty at the University of Southampton, and he is an advisory group member of the Africa Evidence Network. So very welcome to you, Kirchuffs. Then we have Professor Ruth Stewart. I should probably not need to say all three will be very well known to AEN members. Ruth is the director at the Africa Centre for Evidence that hosts the AEN Secretariat, and she's been involved in supporting and using evidence to tackle poverty and inequality. Ruth, it feels like me for all your life, having been born and bred in Malawi and been working across the continent for years. At ACE, the work Ruth leads is really focused on tackling poverty and inequality through the increased use of evidence in 4 areas of advancing arts and science of evidence use, increasing and strengthening evidence capacities, building and facilitating evidence communities, where I think the strong role of the AEN is, and then also co-producing policy-relevant evidence synthesis. And as you know, Ruth is also the chair of the AEN. So welcome and thank you, Ruth, for joining us. And then Julian Bagyendera, something like that. Julian, Executive Director of Provide and Equip. That's a M&E and management consultancy based in Uganda. Over 27 years of experience that Julian has in HIV/AIDS, population, gender mainstreaming, reproductive health, community development, working on project management, M&E, gender specialist. She's been doing team leader in, I think, Julian, it was over 75 international and national assignments, ranging from work for the World Bank, UN agencies, EU, USAID, various NGOs, multi-development organizations, and you've worked across the continent as well, Uganda, South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Malawi, Cote d'Ivoire, but also outside the continent in China and the US and Thailand, the Netherlands, Canada, so amazing work. And we've also been very privileged within the AEN to have Julian as an AEN reference group member. So thank you very much for joining us, esteemed panel. If we can start our conversations this afternoon, and if I maybe can ask each of you, if you have your cameras on for us and your mics ready. So probably just an open question to you. Maybe you have 4 or 5 minutes to kind of make your remarks about if you think of the African evidence ecosystem, the EIDM ecosystem, what in your view are important current trends that we should take note of that you think will likely be significant for us across, over the next 10 years? Julian, can I start with you, since I see your mic is off and your camera is ready?
All right. Thank you, Dr. Carina, and thank you for having me here. It's my great pleasure. I joined AEN in 2016, and it's my pleasure to belong here. It's been an interesting journey in the evidence ecosystem. We've seen a lot of coming together of the users, the producers, and the users, and even the generators of information coming together and kind of bringing in a professional touch to the evidence, to professionalizing the evaluation associations, developing the different standards for different countries. So I see us taking a a positive note in terms of professionalizing the whole the evidence ecosystem. But then, of course, the COVID-19 brought in a whole new wave of the virtual evidence production, virtual data gathering, even when it came to dissemination. So I think I see a lot of, it brought in a lot of flexibility and kind of a shock, and it improved in a number of ways, the efficiency in many ways, the virtual working mode, but we see a lot of that. But also we see a lot of digitization of data collection, a lot more use of electronic data collection, but also using some online tools like the Google Forms, the Monkey Survey. There is a lot more push towards digitization, but then we also see some trend of localizing evaluations, made in Africa evaluations, incorporating some digital, some indigenous ways of methods of research, some traditional ones. I think that has been kind of a new push too, which brings in like a blend of the two. But then we see a lot of push for inclusivity, inclusiveness, leaving no one behind, and making sure that there is equity and equality in terms of what we produce, so that the evidence we produce is very inclusive and no one is being left behind. Thank you. Thank you.
I forgot. I clearly have not been on long enough. Where have I been for 3 years? Thanks a lot, Julian. Kirchuffs, are you ready to share with us?
Certainly, I'm ready here. And good afternoon to everyone, colleagues. Good afternoon to our audience. It's an exciting time to be joining the celebration of Evidence 2022, and particularly with this discussion we're having, because it's always a good thing to do to review what you're doing as practitioners and gathering perspectives on emerging trends and how we chart the path towards the future, the common future that we're building together. And yes, I acknowledge everything that Julian submitted. And I would want to add that from my perspective, I want to create that linkage with the thematic areas that the AEN and ACE have been working on, I think, for some 2 or so years now, talking about the arts and science of evidence, because the research dimensions are equally getting very much interesting, because we notice that, yes, it's no longer a practice that we approach just from what we can do, okay? But also from what we are learning. How can we make the connections across the different learnings that are emerging from the different contexts, which is equally important? What is contributing to successes in some contexts and the, in quotes, failures in some other contexts? These are all learnings that we need to investigate, and these such investigations are actually going on from the different practitioners across the continent, sharing learnings as and when they get the platform. And so it's a very important thing to note that in fact the AEN has been taking that conscious approach, identifying these themes for some time now. And equally, the thematic area on evidence capacities, they are equally coming out strongly, because across the ecosystem, we notice that different categories of actors are beginning to question their own contributions to the ecosystem. It's no longer a very simplistic view of evidence producers, and then evidence users. Even within these traditional groupings, evidence producers and users, there are subcategories that are coming up that we need to investigate and understand what can they do differently from their own unique practices to enhance the quality of production and use. So we notice initiatives coming up, even from the producer perspectives, to support the technical sides of the production's competencies that they need, as well as after production or even before production, what they need to put in place. Then during the production, the necessary things that they need to put into consideration, and then after production, what they need to do. Because traditionally, after these researchers and academics produce their work, they get it published, it ends there. But now practitioners are thinking beyond the publications, the change that these publications are contributing to socioeconomic developments in their own countries. And yeah, it cuts across for the use side as well, thinking through the dynamics and all that. Let me just rest it here and then we can continue. Yes, thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thanks, Kirchuffs. Ruth, I'm hoping you have something to add. I'm sure you will. But there's been an array of amazing trends already.
It's wonderful to be here, and thank you, Julian and Kirchuffs, for getting us going. If you saw me scribbling on the side, it's because all the things I was going to say, you guys have been saying. So now I'm trying to work out how to add. So bear with me, and thanks for this opportunity. So one of the things we've been thinking about during Evidence 2022 and throughout this year, celebrating 10 years of the AN, has been how we've shifted, right? And I think all of us, whether we were in the AN or just in the evidence community as a whole in our different corners, contexts 10 years ago, we thought of this evidence work as being a handful of individuals. And often that handful of individuals was maybe included some of these big names from Campbell or Cochrane. And then we would know in our local African context, we would know a handful of people who were doing this work. But we weren't very well connected, and the teamwork wasn't yet emerging, or it wasn't well known when it was happening. And now what it feels like is we've got these beautiful pockets, connected pockets, I hope, of innovation and exciting work. And it's exactly, Kirchuffs, what you're talking about around, great stuff happening in this context, we need to learn. Great stuff happening over here, we need to learn. So it feels like these different pieces are growing up, it's like we're coming of age in some ways. But Julian, you reminded me, you were talking about some of the ways in which, for example, the evaluation community has institutionalized some of those changes and actually done a really good job within the MNE world of formalizing processes and mainstreaming, for want of a better word. So when I think forwards, I think there's two or three things that come up that are real challenges and opportunities at the same time. So one of them is the world is interested now in what we're doing. And there's this sense of kind of mainstreaming of some processes. And again, to Kirchuffs, you were hinting at this, like the research impact agenda is suddenly becoming a thing. People are starting to say, well, we don't just publish anymore. It's much more common to have a policy brief or to have to report as a researcher how I'm making a difference. So I think we're going to see within the production side a real shift towards research impact, the research production community talking about research impact. And then I think starting to be, and in some countries clearly well established, amongst particularly government, movement towards better knowledge management. And they see the collation of evidence as being linked to a kind of strategic knowledge management. And our challenge is going to be to make sure that these two movements, and I'm sure there's others as well, for institutionalizing within silos, as they become deeper and more ingrained, we need to make sure that innovation and the connection still happens and they don't just kind of get bogged down. So that was the first thing I thought. The second thing I thought of links to this a little bit. So we know there's amazing individuals across the continent doing great stuff. We know there's amazing teams. how do we move from that to organizations? So not just being an amazing unit in a university or an amazing unit within government, etc., or a one-off think tank or NGO. How do we move from those extraordinary teams to being extraordinary organizations and systems? And I think that's really tricky. Some of the work that's gone to a systems level has jumped the organizational step. But actually, if we're going to have wide range impact, we have to at all those levels, from individuals to teams to organizations, and then institutional and systems. So I think that's going to be a real challenge for us to actually map out the big picture and think about where we're learning. And then I thought of one more thing, and again, you reminded me of it, Julian, when you were speaking, which is around the monitoring and evaluation of evidence, of initiatives for evidence use. So we haven't done a terribly good job of actually recording our successes, our failures, recording the data of the work we're doing so we can learn. And I think that's a real imperative for us as we go forwards. People are asking us more and more, why should you do evidence use? And I'm not sure we've always got the data to give them the clear answers, that maybe we have a passion for this, but now we have to demonstrate it. Thank you, Rena.
Wonderful. Cool. So I'm not going to try and summarize. I'm going to grab out some of the phrases that jumped out for me of what you're identifying kind of as trends and patterns and where they're going. So there's definitely something, I think, about relationships, and I would say something closer to relationships. You know, Julian, you're coming together. Maybe that relates to some of the stuff, Kirchuffs, you raised about learning and sharing. And with that, the diversity of roles that we're seeing coming up, and do we have a hand on that? I think digitization, at the same time localization, with a crucial thing of equity that needs to run throughout all of that. And Ruth, and then you're bringing in the not siloing, that we, you know, and it's again back to relations, making sure we build the connections across, the shift to organizations and systems we're picking up, and kind of then the M&E of evidence use itself. So that for me is some of the broad stuff that you've jumped up for me, that what you said so far. And so I think what I want to hear a little bit from you, if I can probe you a little bit more. So these are kind of general patterns that you've seen and that you're noticing. And what I would like to hear, so we're talking about the Africa evidence ecosystem. But at the same time, we know that within this Africa evidence ecosystem, there's nested evidence ecosystems. You know, there is in West Africa, the evidence ecosystem or systems, you know, in Southern Africa. Then there's national ones, you know, South African one and a Ugandan one. And then you have sectoral ones, and you might even go locally. You know, so there's all these evidence ecosystems that's there. Do you want to maybe comment on the extent to which you think how, and Ruth, if I can maybe now start with you, to what extent you think is this so it's this sense of what is the evenness in terms of this? Where are the areas that we might need to give more attention, or where we already have much? And so what is these differences in a way between various ecosystems across Africa? What does it mean for the Africa as a whole, as an evidence ecosystem?
So what that brings to mind is considering issues around and differences between equity and equality. So we know that the contexts that people are working in are very different. And perhaps a very small example, but engaging with colleagues in Burkina Faso some years ago now, they were talking about needing to go to the hotel to download their emails from the free Wi-Fi because there is no Wi-Fi, let alone any electricity in government in the context in which they're working. And that was such a good reminder for me because, yes, we have power cuts here in South Africa, but it's not the same. So we know that different groups of people are struggling with different practical challenges. But we also know, and the Burkina Faso was one example, but we know there's amazing innovation and work that's happening and passion and determination to get stuff done, even if it means getting on a bicycle and going to the border with the neighboring country and connecting with people in those very rural and challenging environments. So we know exciting stuff's happening, but resources are really varied. So what I think probably is around thinking about how can we ensure that we're not neglecting the communities that perhaps don't either have the language or the technology to be able to come together and share, because we actually need to learn from them too. So something about we know there's difference. How can we still recognize, acknowledge, reward, and learn from and engage with these extraordinary, the variety of initiatives to support evidence use without just saying, well, I've got good Wi-Fi, so you should just join me. So it's really tricky because they're practical challenges, right? Of how to tap into that kind of thing. That's what comes to mind first. Thanks. Yeah.
Kirchuffs, you have something to add here?
Yes, I would come in from when you talk about, yes, you made reference to the different multi-layered ecosystems that we have, and I would want to say that with the practice that we're in, it's contextualized, or it can be contextualized within the development field, right? And so if our practice is not making impact, as in resulting in change in the lives and livelihoods of people, the people to which we serve, then I don't think we are really achieving much. And to that effect, I would want to say that these different initiatives that are running can run at whichever layer that we want to take them from, or from whichever perspective. But then a critical one that I think we mostly overlook, or we easily lose sight of, is what happens at the community level. At the community level, sub-national systems seem to lose lots of focus in our conceptualization of development interventions, including this evidence-informed decision-making practice. And so with one initiative, for instance, that I was part of, you got to understand that, yes, we may be pushing these things from a national approach, from a sectorial approach, you know, from an international approach even, and their initiatives. But then at the very community level, there are people who are affected by the very simple decisions that are taken, whether by practitioners, as in clinicians and doctors, or husbandry and animal husbandry officers, or any kind of a carpenter, a mason, even in the community. The very decisions that they take affect the lives of individuals within these communities. We have policymakers at those levels, assembly government officers. We have traditional authorities, chiefs, and opinion leaders in these communities. They take decisions on behalf of these people. We have business people who initiate investments for profits and other motives. If they choose to do things, take decisions that are contrary to the interests of these very people, then it just doesn't make sense. So we need to pull these different actors together at the community level so that the change that we are seeking, you know, I always say that when we look at this from a national approach, okay, it will take a little more time for the change we're desiring to be seen and be felt, all right? But when we take things from a community perspective, change can very easily be seen, because a simple example could be the siting or the distribution of health facilities in a community, say clinics. If a community is desiring to have a health center opened in their locality, as a decision maker, we need to look at the equity of it. We need to look at the resources, the different factors as we know of, and put all of these in context to inform the decisions that as practitioners we are to make. And if we take that decision, and which affects equitable distribution of resources, then livelihoods are directly affected. Roads are invested in where they are most needed. Schools are built when they are most needed and achieve the greatest results. So until we try to contextualize these things, we may be doing the very work and achieving the accolades internationally, but the very people we seek to serve may not be feeling the effects of our work. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirchuffs. So really, I think for me, a key call of what I hear from you is about that we also need to very carefully think of who's the missing actors and role players in our evidence ecosystems. And whose voices are not there. So we many times when we talk equity and equality, is many times, so these are the people here. Does everyone have a say? And I think you are saying, but who's not here? Whose voices are we missing? Or whose voices are we ignoring? Because there's always a thing, they are speaking, but are we hearing? And so part of me of what you raised for me now, Kirchuffs, is and I think it's probably a case because we all can't be doing all of these things. So there is, how do we make sure we get the people who are working at the subnational level, at the community level? And I think one of the challenges for me there typically lies is that we all use different languages. We use different discourses. You know, I have come through kind of evidence synthesis into the EIDM space. So I, talk EIDM. If I think I've come through the environmental sector, then I talk science policy interface. I might be in economics and I come in and I use the language of behavioral science and nudging and, all of those things. So I come from M&E. And I have a slightly different, I might talk implementation science. So I think there's also something about how we, and so for me, there's probably something interesting, because I wonder if any of you maybe can have any ideas on where you think, because for me, there's something happening and we're right at the early stages, I think in our continent, but also wider, but definitely our continent of getting these these various discourses together. What is the next thing that's happened that we really connect? Is it a case that we must just continue reading one another? Is it that, what is the thing that will lead to that Kirchuffs that you're calling to, where we really have every perspective, every voice, every kind of thing, and not necessarily walking together and doing the same thing, because I don't think that's the purpose. It is in the diversities that we'll do there. But how do we ensure that we keep on learning across whatever those boundaries are? What do you see is the thing that we should be doing in terms of that?
Yes, so I think you hinted rightly at that, and that is the fact that we need to begin to speak together, share our different perspectives, knowledge from our different perspectives. So I had noted that here at some point I'll speak to, which is the problem we have of conceptualization. How do we conceptualize the different experiences we're having? And it's not to say that one discipline is better than the other, because the EIDM, as we all know, is a multidisciplinary area. And so it's about sharing our experiences, the different concepts that we're working with, and then encouraging, how do I put that? Kind of sharing equally from other perspectives, critiquing, opening up for discussion on these conceptual issues. And personally, those are the dimensions or the directions that I would want to take going forward, beginning to look at the conceptual side of this practice, so that we begin to build consensus and raise a lot more question on some of the concepts that we are interacting with, so that the different perspectives around these concepts can be, brought forward, elicited from the different disciplines that are working together in this practice. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe I can add to what you were saying, Kirchuffs. So I do jigsaw puzzles, and I often talk about the ecosystem like a jigsaw puzzle. And I realized, I know this sounds so silly because it's so obvious, but I realized yesterday, so I'm one of the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, and or maybe academia is, or maybe one of these sectors is. And I realized yesterday doing a jigsaw puzzle, it doesn't matter how much I polish my jigsaw piece and tell everyone it's the most important one. It's still the same size as every other piece in the jigsaw, and the jigsaw is not complete unless we have every piece. So I think you're right that we get distracted sometimes by arguing for our corner, and instead of saying what else is in the picture, who else should be with us. And that actually, unless we really learn, embed in ourselves and how we work to value and respect those other jigsaw pieces, that they're just as important and we need their voices, then all we're doing is polishing our own piece. And I think listening to the community voices and the different stakeholders who are too often excluded, we need to think about how we can really respect what they bring. Because once we do that and acknowledge there's something important, we also see the holes in our jigsaw picture and that we can't improve without including those people. So that's how I've started to envisage what I think you've been saying all along this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Dr. Carina, you're on mute. May I?
Aye, sorry. Yes, Julian, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, both Dr. Kirchuffs and Dr. Ruth have brought out very important and practical aspects of one, the often neglected part of the jigsaw puzzle, if I may bring it out. Usually the community level, the people on the ground have become more of providers of information. You're doing a study, you run to them with a tool, you're doing this. And there is so much fatigue on the ground, and they are saying, okay, when do you come back to us? But for us, usually, of course, you are contracted, okay, do data collection, produce a report. At best, you disseminate at national level, you know, or regional. But we rarely go down. So we have made one of that part of the ecosystem more of providers than users. Yet as Kirchuffs says, there's so much they can do with that information at their local level. So I think going back to our designs, we need to really more intentionally bring them on board and see how they can use that at their level and then be able to provide more so that we minimize that fatigue, even as we are doing dissemination, to be a bit more deliberate so that we seem to value them, listen to them, and also hear how they are going to use this information. And the technology point you raised, Ruth, yes, it's very important. We do digital, but in some districts you go and there's a power blackout for 2 days, and you know we have to buy them the chargers, what do we call them, power banks. We have to identify places like fuel stations, health centers where they can go and charge. But in some districts, some parts, it is a bit tricky. The other point I wanted to bring forward is that when we were looking at differences across regions, I wonder whether it is across nations or for particular countries, there is some kind of political influence on what evidence is used and how it is used, so that at times, even when the evidence is out there clear, the politics in that country may determine how it is used. Perhaps that is one other thing that we would, going forward, see how best do we manage this to make sure that evidence is used as evidence without any other interference. And thank you.
I think really some amazing questions, responses you all have, and I think your comment now, Julian, about the politics of evidence for me relates very strongly to Kirchuffs' comment about communities, because if communities are also because I think so too many times we think of end users as government officials, but if communities and just citizens are end users of evidence, they will hold to account government. So we're strengthening our democracies as well if we really make sure we have this wide horizon. Now, maybe if I can continue with the idea of a wide horizon, if we think from the Africa evidence ecosystem, the EIDM ecosystem, if we think broader into the world, where does the African evidence ecosystem fit into the world ecosystem of evidence and evidence use? I wonder if you can comment from your position. What do you think are some of the unique features for you of the African evidence ecosystem? If you compare us to other continental or the global evidence ecosystem, what is it that you think are really like, you know, those really unique features in terms of that make us shine, that we're great at? But potentially also, what are the areas that we really need to think of, that, and whether it is by design or by structural issues, what are the areas that we really should give some attention to, that we really need to improve across the continent in our evidence ecospace? Anyone wanting to kick us off? Ruth, yes.
Kick us off with a very short and slightly grumpy response. So I think there are amazing things happening. I love hearing about innovation, often relationship focused, exciting initiatives. Examples such as the storytelling traditions that are being used in Cameroon, but many of those, they're extraordinary. And they're very much grown, I think, from some of the stuff you were talking about, Kirchuffs, a real engagement with communities, and the passion and incentive to make a difference to people who are living in poverty in the communities around us that we want to support. So I think it's extraordinary what's happening, and I'm very inspired by what's happening. My grumpy bit is that, unfortunately, I think that there is a really big challenge to get the world to pay attention to the context in Africa, and to stop coming to us to help, and to start listening to the innovation and leadership that's coming across the continent. And I sadly think that challenge will remain long term, and we have to get grumpy sometimes to say to people, look, there's extraordinary leadership here. Please include us at the table as equals, not just as some kind of deficit model view of what's happening in the continent. So that's my quick response. Thanks, Karina.
Kirchuff, Julian, any comments for you? Yes, Kirchuffs.
Yes, so yes, I would want to continue with the political economy issues that you raised a while ago. To add that, yeah, I think Ruth mentioned what I call use of existing systems and mechanisms, including maybe the storytelling when people would meet at the very community level. That is something probably they are used to. So if that is a mechanism that exists, then we can look at taking advantage of those to drive home the initiatives, kind of designing our initiatives to use these mechanisms. And typically when we're looking at political economy dynamics within our contexts, we can talk about the formal and then the informal ones. So the formal ones seem to be those that are well known by even outsiders, you know. And so typically our funders may want to, you know, drive us to use more of these formal ones because they seem to be more rational, kind of, you know, that everyone can associate with. But very often also, change, if you want real change, they are driven by the informal ones. Because in Africa, I would want to link that to our history of colonialization, okay? Many of the things that we practice as in our political systems, okay, they're very foreign to us. And so some of these systems that we have, I mean, some of these structures and mechanisms we have as part of our political systems in which we operate may seem to make sense and to be rational, but the average citizen or the practitioner or the different stakeholders may have alternative ways of doing these things apart from the formalized ones. And so when we try to limit ourselves to the formalized ones, the change that we may be seeking, even if realized, may just be a facade, just for a moment, for the project to record as for monitoring evaluation purposes. But the fact of it is that if we want real and genuine change, we need to look a lot more at the informal systems that exist, the culture, the soft aspects of our society, the beliefs of these people. These are the things that we need to start investing in and see how we can help them. Even leaders, the accountability systems we have, they may not be working. In West Africa, we make reference a lot to the increasing, pace of or the rollback of democracy. Gradually we're experiencing that phenomenon across West Africa as a whole. But you go deep and you realize that the people, the leaders, the people even to some extent may not have appreciated these, concepts of democracy and the way it is being designed to operate now. And that we need to go beyond the formalities and see what works for the people, what works for the leaders. If certain things can be done without necessarily the formalities of them, we may want to open up to them, accommodate them for the very fact that they result in change, lasting, sustainable change. These are the kind of things that we may want to look a lot more into, the informalities in our work.
Mm-hmm. And then we're back to the real importance of learning and sharing together. And there's always, I always remember the first time I got this whole lecture on informality, Kirchuffs, of trying to grapple with this tension in a way between informality and formality. Because so many times in informality, now you want to now make it formal and get it going. And was typically it's once we formal that the rest of the world's learning, or that other countries are learning, or other sectors are learning. But that's also in a way the tension, because the way and so for me, there's also a slight tension in terms of learning from the informal and really exploring that much more. But at the same time, we've recognized this pattern or trend around institutionalization. And to what extent institutionalization then takes away some of that innovation that happens in informality. Julian, anything to comment on the conversation here?
Yes, please. At 1 minute, I think my internet went off, but I hope, yes, I'm still on. But what I wanted to contribute is that in order for us to foster the evidence use and production and all that and efficiency, it is important to have some kind of repository system. I don't know, starting at national level, there are so many people doing different pieces, generating a lot of evidence, but at times we even end up replicating. But if we could have that one-stop center repository to know what evidence is being produced by who and and when, so that if you really want to do this evidence, it is really necessary, or it is adding value to minimize duplication and also be able to enhance learning from one another and not duplicating what others have done. So I see a lot of that starting at country level, but then later it can be maybe at the continent level or at the block level, regional level, so that we know what has been done by who and where. And then, of course, we want to run away from digitization. We need to take some small but bold steps towards digitization, because I think we can't run away from it. So, of course, all efforts towards improving the internet connectivity, provision of affordable, technologies is crucial. And then emphasizing use at all levels. We have talked about this, but I wanted to add also among the groups that are often left out, particularly the young people themselves, the women, some of those low levels, or people with disabilities, there are some of those groups that can be often left out. But going forward, if we can intentionally make sure we bring them on and listen to them and even see how they are using this evidence, rather than just participating from providing. And Yes, I think that's what I wanted to add briefly, but my internet went off at some point, so I hope that
that's definitely it complements and it's new to what we've said. I wonder if I can, you have my head going in a hole, and I wanted to go, I wanted to talk about the demand-led of our Africa evidence ecosystems and what kind of relationships beyond formal, but let me, I am aware of our time. So maybe if I can ask you to maybe bring our reflections back specific to the AEN then. In the light of all these trends you're picking up, the things that you've identified where it's going, but also the areas where we need to foreground some more, what do you think are then the strategic role for the AEN? So the AEN, we're a network of individuals who sit all across Africa, and some sit outside of Africa but have an interest in Africa, and we all want to see, and we're promoting the use of evidence because we want to see change in people's lives for real. So what is it that we as a network of people, well, goodness, Siziwe can tell us, I think over 3,000 of us all across the continent, what is our strategic role together as a network for the next 10 years? Where should we be going as a network? Where should we be giving our attention? What should we be foregrounding as a network together in terms of all these stuff that you've been raising? Any of you want to kick us off, Kirchuffs?
Okay, maybe I should start that. I think so far, like I mentioned from the beginning, the thematic areas that AEN has been working at have been very good. The three basic one, the art and science of evidence use, the one on evidence capacities, and then on evidence communities, kind of bringing people together, sharing their experiences and all that. Very useful. But going forward, I wish that the AE can play kind of a facilitating role as well, so that certain initiatives could be co-developed with the leadership of the AN, pooling the different competencies that we have across the region within the network, pooling them together, and then helping, driving the design using these competencies we have within, targeted at in-country and other targeted groups. With the reputation that the AEN has built over the years, it's a whole asset in itself. And so funders, I'm sure, will have a lot more confidence in the systems that the AEN has built over the years. It kind of guarantees certain standard practices within the domain, which will be very useful, particularly as across the continent, yes, the practice may not be equal, certain countries may be open, politically than others. Competencies may be concentrated in some countries than others. Some disciplines may be doing better than others. So these are the different things that I think the AEN can, step forward and take that leadership role in terms of facilitating the design of initiatives, ultimately to be implemented by the same members, but then pulling these resources together to complement each other in these initiatives. Yeah.
Kirchuffs, it reminds me, listening to you now, it reminds me on talks, I think actually Ruth, me and you in Charity had not too long ago about how to think of the nature of relationships in the AEN, and that there's a network of people, but that they are within that network of 3,000 people, there's lots of variance in terms of the nature of relationships, and how do we consciously structure and recognize different kinds of relationships. Some people might just want to be informed and be part of a network. Others want to be, and I think, Kirchuffs, you're one of the drives around the communities of practice within the AEN, of closer groupings of people who really share and learn way closer together on specific stuff. And then, you know, I think for evidence, Siziwe was the drive in lots of our work around working groups, for example, even closer. And I think part, Kirchuffs, what I'm also hearing to you, it's nearly like getting even closer collaboration as project teams on specific stuff where we're doing very specific stuff together. Ruth, you have something you want to add here?
Yeah, so maybe just building on that idea of teams. So I do think that the AN has a role now. We started, and now we can roll out and include more to engage with individuals in more detail in small groups, but also to engage with teams more. Excuse me, I'm coughing. And then when I reflect, you know, we're 10 years old. Where do we want to be in 10 years' time? I think that there is a gap, not just in, you know, in the work I've done to date, but also as a wider community, and Kirchuffs picked up on this early on, around, and I'm not sure if it's called community evidence or community engagement with evidence or community voices, but I do think that there's a piece in the picture that we have been neglecting for a long time. And if we're going to continue the way we've begun, really doing world-leading stuff about, you know, what are the big issues and how do we move forwards? How do we get ahead? How do we dive into the difficult things? And I think one of the difficult things is how do you engage at a community level with the use of evidence in decision making? Then I would love in 10 years' time for the AN to have really got their hands dirty in trying to think about this, how to do this well, how to learn from those who are doing it well across the continent, and how to really encourage and showcase the great stuff that is happening. So that's one of my dreams for the AN in 10 years' time. Thank you.
Julian, you want to add some dreams?
Yes, thank you. I hope I managed to get what to add. But first of all is to keep the network and ecosystem picture in mind, so that the network, we make sure all producers, commissioners, users, you know, all parts are part of it, of the network, for networking purposes, but also enhancing use, but also, yes, the ecosystem, knowing that we need all these different parts to work. But I also think, yes, the network can provide strategic, strategic oversight and guidance in terms of where we want to be in the next 10 years. Where do we see ourselves? I see the evidence providing that guidance. And I wonder whether going forward, whether you want to only work with individuals or there are strategic institutions that maybe you can work with to have a bit more influence in the different countries. Okay, for instance, the Uganda Evaluation Association, I'm just thinking loud, if you worked with such professional entities, maybe you would be able to influence a lot more. And of course, supporting the professionalization of the evidence production. Thank you.
Julian, you remind me now of a thing I've thought about when I was preparing for this, and that's really partly also what are the other key networks the AEN as a network is relating to. So we know of, you know, the INGSA Africa chapter, for example. I think AFREA, which I think the Ugandan Evaluation Association is also linked to. If I think of AFIDEP's work, you know, the African Parliamentarians Network on Development Evaluation, you know, there's a whole range of, and I think, Kirchuffs, that speaks to what we said earlier about the getting over the concepts, the conceptualization and the discourse fields, and how we all cross the boundaries. And I think that, Ruth, that's something you're passionate about. You love crossing boundaries and standing in all of them and bringing it all together. So do you what would like to hear from all three of you, kind of a wrap up, kind of your take-home message for us around where we are AEN is 10 years old. We are identifying these trends and patterns across the evidence ecosystem. We're looking forward for the next 10 years. You've identified some of the strategic roles, but what for you is that kind of that thing you want us to hear around where we are and where we're going in wrap-up stuff? So Ruth, do I start with you now? Yeah.
Sure. Mine is very simple. I think we've got where we are because we've invested in relationships and respectful, equal, listening, relationship building. And I think that needs to be where we're headed as well. And we mustn't let go of that. That this is about spending time together and listening to one another, and that through those relationships, that's how we move forwards. Thanks, Carina.
Great. Julian? Oh, sorry, Kirchuffs, your mic is off. On.
No, Julian can go before.
Julian, you can go, Julian.
Okay, thank you. Yes, whatever we have discussed, whatever we want to do, I think it calls for more flexibility, adaptation. We have to be flexible, to be ready to cope with, eventualities like the COVID pandemic, and that also calls for contingency planning. So I think we need to keep flexible, ready to be able to reinvent ourselves and make ourselves quite useful and relevant in the event that there are changing circumstances. We really need to stay focused and relevant and ready to adapt. That is my summary. Thank you.
Indeed, key. Kirchuffs?
All right, so I would want to emphasize the point made on crossing boundaries, because it's very important. I've noticed, and I think we all know about movements within the practice, targeted at data systems. For instance, we're looking at research, promoting research. We're looking at promoting evaluations, for instance. But there are other resources like gray literature, which we very hardly think of. These are all useful. Sometimes we tend to look at the high level or high end evidence types, but all these other ones are equally important in the practice. So we need to look at that, as well as invest a lot also into the technologies that help us. Yeah, we made reference to the internet and connectivity and the power issues. But one thing I want to highlight within the technology field is talking of information systems and the platform, for instance. Which platforms are people comfortably using? Take, for instance, WhatsApp. WhatsApp, it's a platform that, is so common in Africa. So how do we deploy these existing, platforms that can facilitate our work going forward? And then my final one would be to acknowledge certain movements also that are going on that complement to our work. Take, for instance, open science and open data movements. We can talk of decolonizing development, which includes research and the practice. We can talk of equity and social inclusion, and then the open government partnership. These are all things that may not be within our domain, directly, but their own achievements have effect, the impact, the work that we do. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, amazing. I feel like everyone should be clapping with me. I'm not going to try and summarize at all. It's very personal. My listening to the three wise Africans. I think there's something for me that's starting off with that each of us must find our space in the jigsaw. There's a big jigsaw, and it's an amazing jigsaw. And it's a beautiful picture all across Africa. And it is, I think, finding our space there, Ruth. And part of that is that it's finding your space in relation to others. we're not for the big men syndrome that people accuse African politics of. It really is finding our place in relation with others, of where we fit, what's the role we play, and we do that with kind of dedication. And so part of that's for the A end. Where do we find our role in relation with others to do? I think, the comments around the crossing of boundaries, and it reminded me, Julian, I think there is something, because a big part of crossing boundaries is being aware, knowing what others are doing. And there's something about your comment about where we're banking our learnings, where are our knowledge repositories, where's that easy, accessible, where we all can go to and share. And it relates to platforms, because, WhatsApp is an amazing platform to also bank stuff. So I really think there's something there. And I think, Kirchuffs, your raising of the communities, kind of the emphasizing the users, because that's really what the whole evidence ecosystem is about. It's about use. And that we make sure we're expanding who we have in our mind when we think of users, communities, youth, women, all of that it's research, it's practitioners' knowledge, it's local evidence, it's aware of the politics of it, aware of the values, because I think values, and I think that's what you raised also, kind of values, because, I think for me, the bottom line in all of this is really Agenda 2063 that says, what is the Africa that we want? And in a way, that's what the EIDM ecosystem gives us space to do. It is to design and be part of building the Africa we want. So thank you very much, the three of you, our panelists, for awesome discussion, and looking very much forward to hear what the audience have to say. But Siziwe, I'm going to first hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Carina, and thank you very much to our panelists. It has been a very rich discussion. I'm really excited. Just to say that we're going to give our audience a few minutes to interact with the discussions that have been done here through the chat, and also you'll have an opportunity to open your mic and share your inputs. But also, most importantly, we're going to put together a blog for this session that should pull out, the key messages, so that those people that don't have time to listen to the entire recording will have an opportunity to have a shorter version of it, and also continuously interact with this content via all our social media platforms, and also with the evidence platform, because that is really important to keep the conversations going during evidence and beyond. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to all our participants. It has been a great session. Thank you so much.
I'm just